Hello, so today we are going to do Advent of Code Day 4. So the problem says that it's day 4, camp cleanup. So basically, I'm not going to read the details here, you can read them, but for the sake of time, I'll just give you the gist of the problem. So we get intervals, and these are sort of sections where each elf needs to clean up. And what the first part asks us to do is to see which intervals are entirely included in another one, right? So for example, let's see here, 2-4 is not included in 6-8. But if you look, let's take an example here maybe, 2-8 is fully included in, it's not really, no, it's not fully included in, but 4-6 6-6 is fully included in 4-6, so that's a solution. 3-7 is fully included in 2-8, right? So it doesn't matter which interval is fully in the other one. We just need to count the pairs where one of them is fully in the other one, right? Not an overlap, fully in it, right? So for example, here we have 2-8, 3-7. 3-7 is fully included in 2-8. We have 6-6 is fully in 4-6. We have, I think those are the two ones. So only those two, so we return 2. So that's what the problem asks us to do, and we will get an input like this. And so let's get started. So I have here the day 4 input, so you can see just a list of ranges. And just we need to check that for all of them, we need to check if we need to count the number of ones where one is fully and the other one is. So let's just first get our input done properly. So what we need to do here is, so the first step, we need to get the input file, right? So we get our input file, which is, we are just going to open day 4 txt with read, and then we are going to get the lines, right? Each line of this input. And so to do that, we just split by input. So split by a new line. And once we do that, so this would be part 1. So we'll just go through every line for line in lines. How do we get the two ranges? They are separated by a comma, so we can just separate by that. So line.split by comma. So let's call them intervals 1 and 2. So I1 and I2. So this gives us the first one and the second one for each line. And then now we just want to get the start and the end of each one. Why? Because what I will do is something like this. So the case that we are looking for is the first, either we have only two cases, only two cases that we need to count, right? The other ones we don't care about. So the first one is something like this, where the first interval is fully in the other one, right? The second one is something like, it doesn't have to be like exactly these values, but just to give you an example. The second one is, and this would be I2, second one. And the other case is that it's the reverse, right? It's I2 that is enclosed in I1, right? But let me just put this below so that it sort of makes sense more. Okay. So only one of these two cases, right? And so we just need to check these two cases. But first, how do we check? Well, you can see here it's the start of, in the first case, the start of I1 is in between the start of I2 and the end of I2. And the end of I1 is between them as well. So what this says is that either is fully in, right, is in, so it can be equal as well, right? It can be something like this. Right, this fully in it. So it's in between the two edges of I2, so I2 end, or the other case here, right, which is, there is no other possibility, right? So the other case here is that it's the reverse, right? It's just reversing. It's the I2 start that is in between those two. right? But also we need to check that the end is in between them, because we could have something like this, and we shouldn't count this, right? So we need to also check that the end is between the two. So we need to check that the end, I1 end, is between the two. And the same thing here, because we could also have something like this. So we need to check that end is also between the two, right? But if these two are good, then we should be good. So we just need to get the I1 start and the I1 end. How do we do that? Well, they are separated by just this here, so we can just separate by it, split by it, right? So it would be I1 dot split with underscore. And we do this, but since it's probably a string, we just convert it here, just in case. So for X in this, and we do the same thing for I2. Okay. And now we can just do our conditions here. So if this, or just one thing though to optimize this, because it's too long, we actually don't need to check this here. When since we are checking the end, we don't need to check the, right? Because if this one is smaller and this one is smaller, then by definition start is going to be smaller than, if the I1 end is smaller than I2 end, then I1 start would be, then I2 start would be smaller than I2 end, right? Because the end of the same interval is smaller than I2 end, then that means the start is also smaller, right? So we don't need to check everything. And same thing here, we just need to check like this. Okay, so this would make it a little bit simpler. And so let's just take this. So if this, or this, right? Then we need to count. And so we need to have our counter here that we initialize to 0, and then we can print our count. Okay. Okay, so now let's just run it and make sure it passes. So we need Python day4.txt. Okay, let me just, looks like we didn't print it. Okay. Day 4, save, and let's try again. Python, sorry, my bad. Okay, so it looks like there is just one problem here with split. Let's see. Yeah, we didn't read it, so that's the problem here. So we need to read and then split. Okay, so now this is the result. Let's just verify that it's the right one. Let's see. Yep, that's the right one here, right? Now let's do part 2. So part 2 is similar to part 1, but instead of, I won't read the details here, but it's just like checking if there is overlap, right? And counting how many overlaps we have. In the previous problem, 5-7 overlap with 7-9 at 7 exactly. 2-8 overlaps with 3-7 because it's fully in it, so there is overlap. Here there is overlap at 6. Here there is overlap at 4, 5, 6, right? And so yeah, we count, it's 4, right? So let's do that. So how do we do part 2? So part 2 actually, we can simplify it in a way where, let's just list all the cases we can have, right? So we can have something like this, an interval like this, right? There is an overlap there. Or, so this would be, the first one would be always I1. You can think of the first one as always I1 and this one as I2. Okay? The other example is just the reverse. I1 is the one here and then I2 is the one here. Something like this. Okay, so there is still overlap here. The other case is that the full overlap thing that we saw in the previous example, something like this. And like this. Okay, so this would be I1. So this is the fully in it example, and the other two are the partial ones. So these are pretty much like a list of all of them, almost, right? Pretty much, I think. So here, how do we detect overlap? Well, you can see here, as long as the largest of the start is smaller or equal than the smallest of the ends, then we would have an overlap, right? So here, for example, so what I'm proposing is that if we do max of I1 start, right, and I2 start, the max of the start of the two intervals is going to be smaller. If there is an overlap, is going to be smaller than the min of I1 end and I2 end. Because let's say here, the max of the start is this one. If it's smaller than the smallest one, that means there is an overlap, right? So, for example, that would work here. The largest one of the start is this one, and the smallest is this one, and it's smaller than or equal to it. Let's say if this was not true, then we would get a case like this. Okay, this would be the largest of the start, which is this one, is actually bigger than the end. So there is some space between them. So there is no overlap, right? Let's do the other case where there is an overlap. So the other case where there is an overlap is like this. In this case, the largest of the start is this one, is actually bigger than the smallest of the ends. So you can try we try all the different cases where there is no overlap and this condition is not valid, and all the cases where there is overlap, the condition is valid, right? So this formula should give us whether there is an overlap or not, right? So let's just do overlap. Let's call it equal to 0. And we need the exact same intervals. And the function that we'll do is just check this to check if there is an overlap, okay? Now, if this is the case, then we want to increment count overlap by 1 and print overlap, okay? And now let's just run this and see how much overlap. It's 841. Let's verify, and that's the right answer. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for this problem. It's sort of interval focused one. Checking overlap is a lot easier with this formula. Yeah, so yeah, that's pretty much it for today's problem. Please like and subscribe, and see you on the next one. Bye.